Thank you again for taking the time to sit with us. So let's just start. Why run for Congress?
You know, I woke up one morning and I turned on the news and I thought, we've got to do something and do something serious. So I decided to jump into the race. I think I'm the strongest candidate. I think I can serve the people of Miami. I think I can hit the ground running going to Washington. I know something about Washington. I certainly know the issues and the issues that people in this community care about. So I'm ready to go.
So let's talk about that moment, the moment that you see this country in. Describe it for me. What exactly are we facing as a country today?
We're facing the test of who we are. It's so fundamental. It really is about the character of the country and how we treat each other and how we're seen by the rest of the world. I've never in my lifetime seen a time like this in which everything we've worked for our whole lives is at risk because of this president and the failure of the Republican Party to provide the kind of leadership that the country expects and that they promised.
Can you be specific?
Well, let's start with the president. Every place you go on this earth, they wonder what on earth we are doing here in the United States. We're pulling back from our international commitments. We're acting like there's not a global economy. We're beating up women and children with our budgets. Who ever heard of a president that wanted to cut food stamps or Medicaid or a political party that wanted to cut Medicare? The kinds of announcements that they've made on the environment, on children, on women's health, on women's reproductive freedom are outrageous because we have consensus in the country on those issues, but they've just gone right after them.
You talk about issues. So what are the main issues you're going to be running on?
Well, first, immigration. I'm the granddaughter of immigrants. My mother's side of the family was down here in South Florida, actually in this district, since the end of World War II. My grandmother actually got turned away at Ellis Island. She came around and snuck across the Mexican border. My Lebanese grandmother. If my grandfather had gone with his cousins on the first boat out of Lebanon, I would have been Cuban because his first cousins went to Cuba. So there are Cuban Shalalas. Every person that is in this country now, the DACA kids, and I know so many of them personally because they're students at the University of Miami, those that get up every day and go to work and have some questions about their immigration status, they ought to find a pathway to become good citizens of this country. We've got to find a way, a fair way of dealing with the immigration question.
So how would we? So I'll come back to the other issues that you want to talk about. Let's stay with immigration for a second. So what specifically, you've talked about extending a status to DACA kids so that they could be able to...
And also people that came here on temporary status. Now we've got to find a way to take care of them as well. We have a large number of people in this country that have no chance of getting citizenship, and we have to find a pathway.
So the roughly estimates are 12 million people.
About 12 million people.
You would find a way for a path
Absolutely.
for all 12 million to become U.S. citizens?
Absolutely, I would.
Does that not encourage others to just come across the border?
No, because at the same time we have to secure our borders. I have no problem, and I don't think any Democrat does, with securing the borders. But that also means that we have to pay attention to the people that are here at the same time.
So, but what does that look like, securing the borders for you?
For me? Well...
Does that mean a wall?
Probably not the kind of wall that our president is talking about, because it's impossible to build that kind of wall across the border. But it does mean that we have to work with other countries to both help their economies, but simultaneously to make sure that people aren't entering this country and staying here on visas like student visas or visitors visas. So part of it is our ability to track people once they come into the United States and to make sure they leave when they promise to leave at the same time. But it does mean that we have to have border patrols and we have to have appropriate restraints on our borders.
All right, so immigration was one issue. What are the other major issues for you?
Job creation.
Job creation.
And one of the wonderful things about Miami is we're increasingly a place of entrepreneurs. We do not have these large industries. We only have a handful of large industries. But we also have to make these, many of the jobs that we have, better jobs. My mother had 4 home health care workers. I fought with the agency that we hired them from to give them a lot more money, about 25% more than what the agency was willing to pay them. And we provided them with health insurance. Home health care workers, we've changed the nursing role in this community. You have to have a 4-year degree to work in the hospitals now. And all of us have invested in training nurses. Nursing is now, moves you into a middle class area. There's no question about it. But also childcare workers. So if you take a look at what the military, for example, has done in childcare, they've invested in childcare, in facilities, in upgrading the skills of childcare workers because they were concerned about the children of people who had been deployed. They now have the best childcare centers in the world.
So how does Congress deal with that? So what role would you play as a member of Congress to make that happen?
Well, one of the things you can do is increase the commitment to childcare. The childcare resources, I know the Department of Health and Human Services, childcare is funded out of HHS. So we not only have to increase the money for childcare, but we have to increase the standards for childcare. We have to work, many of them are represented in other parts of the country by unions. In this city, we have to make sure that they're properly paid and have access to education and training, particularly to child development. And we simultaneously have to make sure that we, one way or another, can invest in the facilities that the children are in. In addition to that, through the Head Start program, where we have made major investments, Head Start in this community also has to reach into people's homes. So many of the children are taken care of in children's homes. The Children's Trust has done a wonderful job investing in some of these programs, as has other charities in our community, including United Way, which has a model program.
Okay, immigration, job creation. Give me a third one, then I want to move on to some specific questions.
Let's talk about education.
Okay.
And let's talk about the federal role in education. Everything that the Trump administration has done is to take resources away from our public schools. The center of creating Americans, particularly in a community of immigrants like ours, is well-funded public schools. And our superintendent will tell you he desperately needs resources, particularly for the new people that come, the new kids that come into our community.
But that's a local issue. Why is that a federal issue?
Because the federal government provides enormous resources, particularly for the poorest children through Title I, the poorest children in our community. And as those resources are drained off into private schools, that means for special education and for children that grow up in poverty, for lunch programs and for breakfast programs, if those programs are cut, as they have been under this administration, we can't make the kind of investments we want in making children healthy and making sure they have the right foods to eat and simultaneously making sure that we have the best teachers to teach them.
All right, let's take a step back for a second.
I haven't gotten to health care yet, which I know a lot about.
Well, let me phrase it this way. You were the Health and Human Services Secretary. Is this not a step down for you to run for Congress?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
What? Because this is a policy-making role, and it's representing one of the great cities of the world. Let's not underestimate the importance of Miami in the flow not only of politics, but in the disparities between what we pay in and what we get back. What I want to make sure, which our governor seems to forget, is that we pay taxes to Washington. We ought to get our fair share back. We have ignored the fact that we've stepped aside on billions of dollars for Medicaid to extend the Medicaid program, which was put in place under Obamacare.
Did Obamacare fail, though, in its central tenet of wanting to try to lower the cost of health care? It failed in that regard. You admit that, correct?
Well, first of all, Obamacare wasn't designed to do that. Obamacare was designed to do coverage.
But the notion being that with coverage, you bring down the costs as well.
Well, it brought down the cost for the population it covered. There's no question about it. Deep subsidies, both in the extension of Medicaid, which we did not do in Florida, but in the exchanges, which we do in Florida. People of lower incomes get deep subsidies. For them, it cut down their costs. But there's no question that the centerpiece of Obamacare was to get people more coverage at an affordable price, and it did that. And by the way, you just go ask people who have Obamacare in our community whether it made a difference in their lives. I know lots of people in our community that get Obamacare that got the subsidies and for the first time in their lives are getting good health coverage.
All right, let's talk about, I want to bring up a couple of things. You talked about that you believe you're in a unique position to jump into this race and handle this issue. There are already 6 other Democrats in the race. Why do you think you're better than them at doing this?
First of all, they're all wonderful people, and I'm certainly going to run a positive campaign. I've transformed institutions. From my first college presidency to my last at the University of Miami, that I've actually delivered. I've demonstrated that I have the skill to raise and to improve institutions, major complex institutions. So dealing with complex policy issues is in fact my strength.
All right, so let me ask you about this then. Let's talk about your tenure at the University of Miami. There has been some criticism that's going to be directed at you, has been and will be, for instance, with the janitors and their ability to unionize. You were seen as being anti-union in that time, and the janitors went on hunger strikes, and certainly SIU wasn't very happy with you at the time. If, address that question as to whether or not you stymied the efforts for them to create a union.
I did not. And let me say this. It was a contractor to the university. The debate was not over whether we would have a union. The debate was over how we would get to being a union. I am pro-union. I was a member of a union, the American Federation of Teachers, at the beginning of my career. I know the leaders of the unions, both here in Miami, most of them at least, and the national leaders of unions. I've always been seen as pro-union, wherever I've been in my career. Every institution that I've been at until I got to the University of Miami, actually, and only parts of the University of Miami are unionized. Every other institution had full unions. Hunter College, even the faculty were unionized, and I had wonderful relationships with them.
But you were not seen as pro-union on this issue.
But on this issue, it was a debate between the card check as a way of getting to the union and the election. And the contractor wanted to go to an election. The union wanted to use the card check.
And you know why? Unions prefer card check for a lot of reasons. They believe elections there's more intimidation.
Well, particularly in the South.
Right.
Eventually, we got the two together, and the contractor agreed to the card check. But don't see me as anti-union.
Well, I think the idea was that you didn't take an aggressive enough stand early enough on the side of those janitors.
Well, I've always been on the side of the janitors, and I've always been on the side of the workers at the university, and you can ask any one of them whether I've always been on their side. That it took too long, admittedly, but let me assure you, the nurses' unions at the university hospital have had a very successful relationship with the university's leadership. And there is no issue with the janitors now. They continue to make good salaries. And here's the other thing that we put in place at the university. First of all, one of the first things I put in place were English language classes for the contract workers at the university. Someone said to me, well, if they learn English, they'll go get better jobs. That's what a university does. The second thing we put in place as part of our negotiations with the unions was better health care for the unionized workers, and we demanded that every contractor have accessible, affordable health care. Some of them had access to health care, but it wasn't as affordable as it should be.
Another issue that's going to come up, some environmentalists were unhappy with your decision to sell about 80 acres, I believe it was, of land to what would eventually try to become a Walmart. I think it's still tied up in the courts. This notion that you sacrificed trees and nature for the sake of some dollars for the university.
Of course we didn't. And we have a superb record at the university on the environment. I have a long time record on the environment, beginning with the time I was at HUD when we put solar panels on the White House. The Reagan people took them off, of course. But at every institution I've been at, the University of Wisconsin was the first signatory on the famous sustainable policy that all universities.
But this deal in particular, why did this deal go through?
When we decided that we were going to build on the land, we went to Durham, the Department of Environmental Management at the county level, and we asked them whether we could zone it appropriately so that we could build some housing and some commercial development. The reason we focused on commercial development was the county at the time wanted to make sure there was job creation in what was a relatively poor area of Miami. We got all the approvals. We followed every rule. Every time Durham told us to set aside a certain part of that land, we set aside more than they asked us to do. Because of the 2008 downturn, we decided that we would pass the land on, we would sell it to a developer. I believe we sold it to a responsible developer.
So you stand by that decision today?
I stand by the decision. What did we do with the money? We took the money and we used it for student scholarships at the university. We had every right to sell the land at that point, but the most important thing is that when we did the zoning, when we worked with the county, we had unanimous support from the county commissioners. We had public hearings across the community, 8 public hearings. No one ever said to me that we were doing anything wrong in the process, and Durham was tough with us during that time. Yes, we decided to sell it, and the new developer has agreed to a sustainability plan. We consulted with not only Durham, but with the Fish and Wildlife people at the same time. So I don't apologize for it. Every building that we've built at the University of Miami has been built to LEED standards. We're a totally green campus, and all of us have been committed to the environment since the beginning of our careers.
Congress is a place that works on seniority, the House in particular. You come in, if you're elected, you'll come in at the age of 77. How many terms do you think you'll be able to serve?
Well, let's see. My mother practiced law into her 90s. She won the National 80s tournament in her 80s, and she passed at 103. I see a big future ahead of me. And frankly, I'm a senior going to be a senior. And look, I hit the ground running. I don't have to wait 10 years to work on seniority. I know the leaders of Congress. I know how the system works. I've testified at length. So you're sending someone down who knows all of the issues, who knows the politics in Washington, who's not afraid of anyone, and who's passionate about the people of Miami and about our community.
Okay, so you know the politics, right? You understand politics well. Are you not, well, let me phrase it this way. This district is going to be a Democratic seat. It seems if Ileana Ros-Lehtinen is probably the only Republican who could have held it as long as she did, and Ileana even recognized that she couldn't hold it anymore going forward. It was won by Hillary Clinton by 20 points. So this is going to be a Democratic seat. The only thing that could upset it, though, potentially, is if a candidate were to get in that could become more of a controversial candidate. Isn't that potentially you?
No, absolutely not.
Don't you bring with you the baggage of the Clintons, questions that are going to rise over that, the Clinton Foundation? Aren't you going to become a tool, a foil for whoever the Republican is to raise money? Even some of your fellow Democrats in the race are saying they're going to be able to raise money off of your association with Bill and Hillary Clinton.
Bring it on. They've been friends of mine before they were married, by the way. I had a record before I went into the Clinton administration of great distinction. I had already transformed 2 institutions, 2 major higher educational institutions, and I had a reputation after I left. I don't need the Clinton machine. I'm very proud of my relationship with them. I think the Clinton Foundation is extraordinary. I'm going to use the Shalala machine. I know thousands of people in this district. Most of them are quite young because they graduated from the University of Miami.
Talk to me about the Me2 movement. Where are we at today with that?
Oh boy. It's transforming our attitudes about what's acceptable not only in the workplace, in every part of our society. And it's probably the third wave of the women's movement. I would characterize it as that. I can't imagine anything more important. My whole career, I've had zero tolerance for sexual harassment. We've put, all the universities I've been at, we've put in place processes to make sure that not only students, but faculty and staff were treated fairly in the workplace. So I have no tolerance for any of that kind of inappropriate behavior by anyone who either works for me or goes to school in an institution I'm responsible for.
Some people hearing that are going to immediately think of Bill Clinton. Should Bill Clinton have resigned?
No.
Even today, looking back on it, because Kristen Gillibrand, senator from New York,
I know she
has
did.
now come out and said, looking
did.
back at it, he should have resigned.
And you know, it couldn't have been a more painful period for all of us. If you look at the front page of the Washington Post during that time, you'll know that the cabinet member that confronted the president was Donna Shalala. And so I told him what I thought about his behavior at the time.
But you stayed.
I stayed. I'll tell you, everybody stayed. And you know why they stayed? Number one, because they didn't want to cause a constitutional crisis, because we had work to be done, because we were serving not just the President of the United States, but we were serving the American people. Do you think it wasn't painful for all of us? It was. But we stayed because we cared about the jobs that we were responsible for and for the people that we served. The people of Miami can expect the same thing from me.
But do you have less moral authority to call out the president for his indiscretions, having been a part
absolutely
of the
not.
But
absolutely not.
You don't see that as a double standard?
I don't. I don't. I don't see it as a double standard. Listen, I'll call anyone out. I'll call you out if necessary.
You're welcome to. Should the president be impeached?
Well, given what he's done so far, I would love to see him be replaced, but I don't want him to be replaced by Pence. What I want us to be able to do is to focus on checkmating him, and that's by taking the House back. We have to flip this seat and another 30 seats. In addition to that, we have to do everything we can to get closer control of the United States Senate. So, yes, I would if we have the opportunity, would I vote to impeach the president? Absolutely. But what I really want to do is not replace him with Pence, but to find a way so that we're forcing the Congress to do its job, and that is to produce a legislation, hopefully bipartisan legislation, that will take care of the most important issues in our community.
There are some progressives, Bernie people, who will always see in their mind that, that Hillary Clinton did something wrong to sort of become the nominee. Do you believe that she did anything improper?
I don't. I've known Hillary for 40 years. I think she's a woman of very high integrity, very high intelligence. I don't believe that she did anything wrong. And, you know, I do believe that Bernie outlined issues that we have to be careful about and that we have to think about. I support universal health care, for example. I want every American to have first-class health care. And I want it to be affordable, and I want it to be accessible, and I want it to have outcomes that produce better health for Americans, but in particular for the people of this district.
You said before, bring it on, and I'm not sure you're fully aware, and maybe that's, and I apologize if that comes across wrong, of just the landscape now in terms of what you're going to get hit with, whether it's on right-wing radio or, you know, the internet and everything else that's just going to come directed at you in a way that you certainly didn't feel when you were at the University of Miami, and certainly didn't have during the Clinton administration.
I wouldn't be too sure about that. I spent my entire life working with young people.
There was no Fox News during the Clinton administration.
No, but there was right-wing newspapers during the Clinton administration. Sure, it's going to be tougher, but that's why I'm getting in. That's why you want a pro taking on these issues for this community at this time. Do I have a thick skin? I have a passion for the people in the community. And that means that I'm willing to focus on what's good for the people in this community.